If I told you that making one simple change to the way you play chess would instantly help you beat most of your opponents, you would probably think that I am lying. Yet, most of my coaching students are now using the strategy that I'm going to teach you, and they are seeing massive results in their game. So I'm going to teach you a whole different way to think about chess, and we will just be focusing on one thing, something that most people never think about. Pawns. We will be focusing on pawns. And I am going to teach you a bunch of very interesting pawn strategies you can use. And all I want you to do is to pay attention, to watch this entire video, and then try to use what I am about to teach you in the next game that you play, and then let me know how that went. So, first of all, the first rule that we want to follow is that we want to minimize the amount of pawn moves we make. In particular, we want to only think about moving the C pawn, the D pawn, and the E pawn. Those are the only pawns that we will be moving, unless if we really are forced to move one of the others. But in general, these are the pawns that we will be moving. By minimizing the amount of pawn moves we make to only these three, we will be keeping a more beautiful, a stronger, a more flexible pawn structure, which we are going to talk about once we are in the middle game. So right now, I'm not even following any opening strategies. I just want to castle as quickly as I can. Okay, my opponent takes the pawn that I put in the center. That's not a problem because I have already been preparing for this because I always protect my central pawn with a second pawn in case they capture. And now we can just castle. So everything is going great. All right. My opponent here plays bishop to f5, and it's pretty obvious what they are trying to do. At least to me, they are trying to attack this multiple times, and then they are going to try to see if they can win that rook. So I think it's time to make our third pawn move. Pawn to c3. A very good pawn move in this position. This helps to strengthen our center, and it also, again, because our previous defensive pawn was removed. And it also helps to prevent the opponent from going here. So basically at this point, I am already done with my pawn moves. This is what I wanted to do for the pawn moves. I am done with the pawn moves. Now I will be going into part 2 of this strategy, which is that we want to optimize our pieces as much as possible. That's what we want to do. And we also want to see if there is a way that we could damage the opponent's pawn structure. We are going to talk about that in a moment. When I say optimize pieces, I literally just mean pick up pieces from the back rank and try to get them into the game. So for example, here, knight to d2. And what we are going to try during this game is we are going to try to minimize the amount of pawn islands that we have. But you need to understand first what is a pawn island. A pawn island is a couple of pawns who are connected or can still be connected. So these three pawns form an island. These four pawns also form an island. So right now we have two pawn islands. My opponent also has two pawn islands. They are different pawn islands, as you can see. I won't go super in depth there, but we have different pawn islands. Basically, they have more pawns in the center and on the king side, and we have more pawns on the queen side, which we could possibly use to determine a middle game strategy. But first, I'll see what my opponent does next. What I'm always looking for is ways to increase the amount of pawn islands my opponent has, to basically try to split up their pawns. So what I'm going to play is knight to h4. They castle, knight takes f5. Well, let's do the check again for the pawn islands. We have still two pawn islands. In general, oops, that's a blue one. If you don't touch your pawns, you will keep a small amount of pawn islands. My opponent has, this is one pawn island. Remember, they can be connected, possibly. So this is one pawn island. This one here, the orange one, is also a pawn island. And then they have this. This is another pawn island. The more pawn islands you have, the worse your late middle game and end game is going to go, because more pawn islands means more weaknesses that you need to protect. Okay, especially the orange one and also this one. These are the ones that are potential targets for us. Okay. So what to do? Well, we just stick to our plan. We will keep optimizing pieces. We don't need to do anything spectacular. We just want to keep getting our pieces into play. What we would also want to do is we would like to make moves that add attackers to these pawns, or moves that remove defenders from these pawns. Especially this one is my real target. This one not so much, because they can just play g6 and that solves most of their problems. This one is a good target. How can I add attackers or remove defenders? Well, bishop to g5. This helps us because we are attacking the knight. And if the knight is gone, then this pawn will be weak. Okay, our opponent plays h6, and we have to be careful. Usually in this situation, you can just drop back the bishop, and that is fine. Here, that is not the case, because if we drop back the bishop, they build this pawn chain, and then we lose our bishop. So we are pretty much forced to either go back or trade. Well, I will definitely be trading, because my plan was just to remove a defender from this pawn. That is what I want to do. Okay. All right, let's have a look at what we are going to do next. So it's still about optimizing pieces. I'm not really thinking about pawn moves at this point. I'm thinking, how can I get more of my pieces to good squares? For example, rook to e1, I would be getting the rook to a good square. All right. What we also have to think about at any point is which of my opponent's pawns are weak. This one is weak, it's unprotected. This one, not so much. It is protected by the queen now. This one is actually also weak. Whenever I realize that my opponent has multiple weak pawns, all I am thinking about is there a square where if I put a piece there, I would be attacking multiple of these weaknesses at the same time? Yes, there is a square. And there is also a piece that can go there and that can do this exact maneuver. If we go here, then our queen is attacking both of these pawns at the same time. And basically my opponent is already crumbling here. They are already struggling because of the pawn islands that they created, or at least that we created for them. We will be winning. But we also have to watch out, of course. We always have to pay attention to what the opponent is doing. If I just think, ooh, yeah, that's a free pawn, well, yes, I would be losing my bishop as well, because we need to always first sit on our hands and look at what the opponent is doing. So they are attacking this bishop. I have two options. I think I could move my king and protect the bishop, but I don't really like moving my king because I would also be removing a defender from this pawn. Or I could just move my bishop. Yes, this could lead to some trading. I don't know if I would take with the knight or the rook. I think both would be possible. But after those trades, we still have these pawns that are under attack. So let me play this. And this also helps to attack that f5 pawn. Okay, so they take this. All right. Here we have a choice. We can take with the rook, or we can take with the knight. How do we know which move is the right move? Well, the material is currently still equal. The only advantage that, well, equal, as soon as I recapture it's equal. The only advantage I have is that we have the better pawn structure. As you can see, I still have barely touched any of my pawns. If you have the better pawn structure, a general rule is that you want to keep at least one rook on the board, because rooks are the best pieces to attack weak pawns. So I'm trying to get at least one rook on the board. Again, it looks like we have a free pawn here, but it's not as simple as that. It's not just a clean free pawn, I have to say. There is so much going on in this position. First of all, there is quite some pressure on my back rank. There is no checkmate yet, because this wouldn't work. I would be playing bishop to f1. But if I do take the pawn, I always have to watch out, especially this b pawn is sometimes a little bit poisonous. They could attack with the rook and win back a pawn. It also looks like we are winning a knight here, but we would be running into a devastating tactic. Black has the move check with the bishop, and then we drop our queen. So be careful. If they offer you a free b pawn, it's not always free. It's not always free. I'm really looking to see if I could win this isolated pawn. That's the one I'm going for. How can I add attackers? Maybe we can move the knight. The knight can actually go to the e3 square. Yeah, and then we can just add attackers to this pawn. By the way, my opponent gave me the pawn away for free again here, but I hope you noticed, I was a bit quick there, but I hope you noticed that they basically set up the same trap again. It's just from a different side. They are trying to do the same trap. They want me to take that with the queen, and they're actually doing the exact same trap right here as well. They want me to take, and then they want me to lose my queen. That's what they are trying to do. But Since we are doing better in the pawn islands, we are putting tremendous pressure on their position. Just look at this. This pawn is attacked twice. The only reason they are holding on is because of this knight and this queen that could possibly win, or queen. This pawn is also attacked twice. The only reason that they are holding on is because of this queen and this knight combination. But you can see how badly my opponent is struggling here to hold on to all of their pawns because we are putting so much pressure. And usually one of two things is going to happen. We will either just straight up win a pawn, or our opponent is going to try to hold on so badly to those pawns that they might end up badly coordinating their pieces and maybe allowing us to do a tactic. So there are a couple of things that I'm looking at. I am considering the move g3, which, yeah, it's strange, that's a pawn move, but it would also stop this tactic, which would basically mean that this d5 pawn would be weak. So that's the first thing I'm looking at. I'm also looking into the move bishop to b5. This is a nice skewer tactic. We would be attacking the queen and the rook. They probably have to block with the knight, and then I think this is still a free pawn that we can just take just like that. So both of these are possible. If I can solve something without moving a pawn, that will always be my priority. So that's why I didn't move the pawn to g3. And just like this, it is now move 21, and my prediction came true. We gave them pawn islands, and now we already won a pawn. That is our strategy. Okay. Is one pawn enough to win the game? Not always, not always. With very good defensive skills, the opponent might still be able to keep a draw, but at least we are already up a pawn. What I'm going to try to do now is just see if I could maybe win a second pawn. I was looking to see if I could maybe switch my attack to this pawn. However, they push, so we have to move our knight again. Where are we going to go with this knight? This would be a nice square, but the queen is blocking that. I think c4 is also a nice square. We are attacking that bishop, and that's also just in general a interesting square to look at. Since we are already up one pawn, I am okay with starting to trade a little bit, especially if it's getting a bishop for a knight. That is definitely a trade that I'm willing to go for, because this is going to help us to improve our position. So we have a very solid position. We basically just have an extra pawn. Now I will talk about the next step of this plan, which is a pawn majority. All right. What am I talking about? We have 4 pawns on this side of the board. My opponent only has 2 pawns on this side of the board. So we have a 4 versus 2 situation. We will be able to push these pawns, and we should be able to create 1, maybe even 2 passed pawns, pawns that can promote. So it's very obvious to me that we should be playing on this side of the board right here. We should be playing on the queen side with the pawns. My opponent has a pawn majority as well. They have a pawn majority on the king side. They have a 4 versus 3. However, a pawn majority on the king side is way more difficult to use, because using this will also expose their king. Since the queens are still on the board, that would be bad for them. If I start trading a lot of pieces, imagine if we trade the rooks and the queens, this would be a little bit better for them, because they would be able to use their pawn advantage as well without really risking their king. So all of this to say that I think it's starting to become time to think about pawn pushes for the first time. Pushing these pawns would be great. There are many moves we could make. I'm actually thinking a little bit what the best move would be. I'm thinking maybe queen d1 or rook d1 would be good. We need to support the central pawn if we want to start moving those pawns. Oh, my opponent plays this. Well, we definitely have to react to this, right? If we don't do anything, they take. And if we take, well, looks like we have a massive hole straight towards our king. So I think that we are forced to move this pawn up the board. Sadly, usually not something I like to do, but we have to do it here. We also have to watch out, because they have pressure with the pawn here. If I allow them to somehow maneuver their queen all the way over here, that would be a checkmate. So we always need to keep an eye open that we would like to have something like this move, bishop to f1 available, which we currently have available. All right, let me move away my queen. I am trying to move some pieces away from my pawns, because if your pieces are in front of your pawns, which all of my pieces were in front of my pawns, it's very difficult to start pushing pawns. So I'm moving my pieces away. What am I going to do now? Just pushing the pawns. That's our next strategy. We want to push the pawns and we want to see if we can create a passed pawn. Oh, yeah, they fall for this trap. I didn't think they would fall for this trap, but they are basically losing anyways. If they take this, I would actually, well, we have so many recaptures, but I would take this with the pawn, and look at what we just created. Connected passed pawns. We have two pawns that we can push to promotion. This is what I wanted to create. And this would be unstoppable for them. We would just be running these pawns up the board. We would be winning. Yes, I gave myself more pawn islands, but it doesn't matter anymore because we have connected passed pawns. That was the next part of the strategy. But they fell for the trap. They take this pawn, which looks free, but it's actually not free because now the knight is pinned to the queen, and I can play queen d3, putting double pressure on the knight, and we can literally just get a free knight as well. And we get a bunch of trade. So yeah, I didn't think they were going to fall for this. I thought I was going to have to really push for this endgame, but it's a little bit easier than I expected it to be. Okay, what am I thinking about here? Well, it's still the same story. We just want to get connected passed pawn. So I'm looking, is there a way I can create a passed pawn out of this? We still have a 2 versus 1 situation. So yes, we should be able to create a passed pawn. Would be nice if we could take that with the bishop. That's not available. So I think we are just going to have to attack this pawn. I'm going to attack it from the side because then their rook cannot protect it. They can pick up this pawn. I will pick up that pawn. It doesn't really matter. We achieved exactly what we wanted, which is that we have a passed pawn. So that is great. I'm going to slide over my rook, pick up this one, which will free up my king a little bit, and this also helps to protect my passed pawn. Whenever you have a passed pawn, you can follow a simple rule. This rule is called PPP, push passed pawn. Pushing your passed pawn is almost always the single best move in the position. So if we can push the passed pawn, we will push the passed pawn. Okay, now we cannot push it because we would lose it, so we are going to put the rook behind the passed pawn. And that's also a general strategy. You always want to have your rook behind the passed pawn. It's too bad that this is not a dark squared bishop because we would simply be able to attack their rook. Okay. All right. They are blockading our pawn. Whenever they blockade our pawn, we have two well, we actually have one single plan that we would like to go for, which is that we would like to attack that rook. I could run out my king all the way over here, or what I could also do, since this pawn is actually protected, is I could use my rook. However, in general, this is usually not what I do because you like to keep the rook behind the pawn, but hey, this also works. We can push the pawn, so we should push the pawn. That rule is always true. I would like to push the pawn, but I can't, so let me play my bishop over here so that I can protect that square, so that I can push my pawn. Everything is going great. All right. And now we can simply play rook to a8, again challenging their rook. They are basically lost. This is actually a smart defense by them. We take, they take, we cannot promote, but we still have the passed pawn. And basically their king is going to be stuck defending. And I think now it's finally time that we start using our king as well. And this is a very simple winning endgame. I'll just demonstrate this for the sake of demonstration. But basically, we can just move the king. Their king is stuck, staying here forever, which means that we will be able to pick up some of these pawns for free. And then after we pick up these pawns for free, that's actually a queen. After we pick up these pawns for free, I would be able to just push them and promote over here. So I won't finish this game since, yeah, this is a very simple checkmate. But please try out this strategy and then let me know how it went.